Imagine having it all. Everything you want or think you want. Wealth, power, status, youth, a good family, a bright future. And now imagine walking away from all of that because you believe something is fundamentally unfulfilling about it. There's a hollowness that once you see it, you can't unsee it. According to legend, one man, a prince no less, did just that. What he discovered launched a religion. We know him as the Buddha, the awakened one, and what he teaches turns out to be strikingly similar to what Aristotle thought, and something in common with what Confucius was teaching almost at the exact same time on the other side of the continent. I want to see what the Buddha taught, and if those teachings today still have anything to help us with living a good life. Welcome back to American Socrates. I'm Matt Rupert. Before we really dig into the Buddha here, I want to give you a piece of context that I find genuinely mind-bending. In 1949, the German philosopher Karl Jaspers published a book called The Origin and Goal of History. Between roughly 800 and 200 BCE, on 4 different continents, human beings independently produced the foundational philosophical and ethical frameworks that still shape civilization today. In Greece, you had men like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, who turned philosophy away from the study of nature and towards the life of the individual. In China, you had Confucius and Lao Tzu and the great philosophical schools of the East. In Persia, you got Zarathustra. In the Levant, you got the Hebrew prophets. And in India, we had the writing of the Upanishads and the coming of the Buddha. This is a remarkable time for humanity as it began its journey of self-introspection. These people had no contact with each other. There were no trade routes of ideas that connected, say, ancient Athens to the Ganges or to the Yellow River. And yet, they were all independently asking kind of the same questions and sometimes coming up with surprisingly similar answers. They wanted to know things like, what is the good life? How should a human being live? What is the nature of the self? And what do we owe to each other? And they weren't looking to the long traditions of the past that had sustained people for millennia before this. They wanted to come up with their own answers for themselves. Jaspers called this the axial age, the axis around which human history pivoted. He said it was the moment when human beings stopped simply inheriting answers from tradition and mythology and started reasoning about how to live. It was the birth of the examined life, happening simultaneously in different places around the world. Now, scholars argue about the exact dates here and whether the parallel is really as neat as Jaspers claimed. But the basic observation stands. The Buddha was born within a century of Socrates and Confucius. And when you read them side by side, the convergences are rather astonishing. Not because they copied each other exactly, but because they were responding, all of them, to the same set of human problems. So what's going on here? Well, we need to understand what these thinkers were after in their pursuit of the good life. And we've already talked a good deal about Aristotle, and so now I want to look at the Buddha. Who was the Buddha? Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE in Lumbini, in what is now Nepal near the Indian border. He was born into the ruling class. His father was a king of the Shakya clan. According to tradition, astrologers at his birth said that he would become either the greatest ruler the world had ever seen, or the greatest spiritual leader. His father, understandably, preferred the first option, and took great pains to ensure that that's the way his son would go. Siddhartha grew up isolated, surrounded by every pleasure and comfort he could imagine. He was deliberately shielded from anything that might disturb him. Sickness, age, poverty, death. All of these were hidden from him. He eventually married, and not long after had a son of his own. By every external measure, his life was as perfect as it could be. And then, in his late 20s, he decided to start sneaking out, to see what life was like beyond the palace walls. On one of his ventures, he encountered 4 things that his father had tried to keep from him: an old man, bent and frail, a sick person, racked with suffering, a corpse, and finally, a wandering ascetic, a holy man who had renounced everything and who, in the midst of his nothingness, appeared to be at peace. Siddhartha was pretty sharp and a sensitive, philosophically minded individual. What hit him was the recognition that suffering was not an accident or an exception to human life. It was, it seems, the general condition of humankind. Everyone ages. Everyone gets sick. Everyone dies. The palace walls didn't make those facts go away. They just tried to hide it, unsuccessfully. The wealth and privilege that he had gathered weren't the key to the good life, because if it had been, then the walls would have worked. The suffering would not have been able to get in. So one night, Siddhartha looked at his sleeping wife and child, everything he loved and everything he stood to lose, and walked out. Not because he didn't love these people, but because he understood that clinging to what you love when everything is impermanent is itself a form of suffering. He had to understand that, and he couldn't do it from inside that palace. For the next 6 years, he wandered, studied with various masters, and practiced. He spent time with the greatest teachers of his day and mastered their techniques. He practiced extreme asceticism, the near starvation, total deprivation, mortification of the body. He was looking for the answer through a sort of set of spiritual extremes. He had experienced extreme luxury and ease, and so now he was subjecting himself to extreme hardship. But that didn't work either. He nearly died. And then one day, a village woman offered him a bowl of rice and milk, and he ate it. His fellow ascetics were disgusted and left him. And Siddhartha sat down under a tree in a place called Bodh Gaya and decided he was not going to get up again until he understood a way out of this. After 49 days of meditation, he did it. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. He was 35 years old at the time, and he spent the next 45 years walking the roads of northern India, trying to teach anyone who would listen, men, women of all castes, what it was that he had found out. Before I can really dive into what it was that he learned, what made him enlightened, I think we have to clear away what most Americans think Buddhism is. Because there's like a pop culture version of Buddhism that you get through yoga studios and self-help books and, mindfulness apps that offer us a rather thin and sanitized version of something that's actually pretty demanding and much more interesting. So in order to avoid giving us the bullet point version of this complex and rigorous theory of human happiness, I want to make sure that we're not looking at it as if that was all it was. First of all, Buddhism is not stress management. Mindfulness meditation, at least as most Americans practice it, is originally a Buddhist technique, but it's been stripped entirely of Buddhist ethics and Buddhist philosophy. The Buddha was not teaching a corporate wellness retreat here. He's teaching a complete account of why human beings suffer as they do, and what the root cause of that suffering is, and what a human life devoted to uprooting that cause actually looks like. Reducing Buddhism then to mindfulness is a bit like reducing the whole of Christianity to just be nice to other people. And technically that's not wrong, but it is kind of missing the point so completely that it might as well be wrong. Second, Buddhism does not require God, and in that way it sort of blurs the line between religion and philosophy. Buddhism rejects both the idea of a creator God and an immortal soul, on philosophical grounds. The Buddha was not an atheist in the modern, sort of more aggressive sense of that term. He simply declined to speculate about questions that he thought were unanswerable and irrelevant to the problems at hand. The problem of living a good life, that is. When students asked him whether God exists or whether the universe was eternal, he famously compared it to a man who was shot by an arrow, who refused treatment until he knows the name, the caste, and the village of the man who shot him. But you're bleeding. Can't we deal with that first? What this means for ethics is that Buddhism locates moral and spiritual responsibility entirely within us. There is no God to forgive you, no priest to grant you absolution. There's just cause and effect, action and consequence, and the question of whether you are moving towards clarity and compassion or away from them. You own your own life completely. This is apt to strike some of you, I'm sure, as liberating. It gives you a sense of control, a sense of direction for your life. But for others of you, I imagine it's possibly a little frightening. But then maybe that's the point. The idea of freedom without fear or a sense of responsibility is pretty much a fantasy that leads a lot of people into misery. Finally, Buddhism is not passive. I think the pop culture versions of Buddhism give us this picture of a serene, quiet, detached, smiling monk who doesn't care about anything in the world and is abstaining from life in the seclusion of his monastery. That, I think, is a misreading. Buddhist ethics is active and it's actually pretty demanding. It includes steps like right livelihood. You cannot make your money by harming others. And things like right speech, where you're responsible for every word that comes out of your mouth. It includes active cultivation of compassion for others and not just a passive avoidance of cruelty that I think most of us practice. One does not need to hide from life to abandon the path of discontent. Enlightenment, at least in the Buddhist tradition, is not the end of engagement with the world. It's the beginning of a different kind of engagement, one that is freed from fetters of ego and of craving. Okay, to see how all of this works, let me introduce you first to an analogy. Before a doctor offers us a prescription, they have to correctly diagnose the problem that we're having. They need to treat the right disease. Similarly, the Buddha begins not with rules or commandments, but with 3 observations about the nature of reality. The first is anicca, or impermanence. Everything that arises eventually passes away. Everything changes. Your body, your relationships, your feelings, your job, your identity. All of it is in a state of flux, and eventually it will go away. Nothing that you have right now is going to stay. Nothing that you are right now is going to stay. This isn't a philosophy of despair, it's just an observation. Look around. See if that's not true. Everything is moving. The second one is dukkha. This is his sense of unsatisfactoriness. Usually it does get translated as suffering, but that might actually be too narrow of a definition for dukkha. Dukkha is the pervasive, low-grade unease of ordinary human life. It's like an itch that just won't go away. The sense that even when things are really good, you know they're not going to last. And that awareness of that really colors the situation. It makes everything seem a little dismal, a little sad. It's not just pain then. That is part of dukkha as well, but it's the fact that even pleasure is going to be shadowed by its own impermanence. Finally, there's anatta, non-self. And this is the most challenging and I think the most important of these concepts. The Buddha says that there's no fixed and permanent I at the center of your experience because you too are in a state of flux. What you call yourself is a constant shifting bundle of sensations and thoughts and memories and habits. It's not a solid and unchanging soul. You're not just you and you stay the way you are forever. The thing you are most protective of then, and most identified with, this self you spend your whole life defending and promoting, is in self a construct. It's not a bedrock reality. It's something that is made up by you and the people around you. So it too can change. It too can be morphed. These 3 are then connected in kind of chain. Because things are impermanent, anicca, and because we think of ourselves as a fixed thing, anatta, we keep grasping for permanence in a world that just won't provide it. And hence, we suffer, dukkha. If the self is not the fixed thing that we think it is, then the whole engine of craving starts to loosen. Desire begins to slack off, and we can find ease and comfort in this world. Think of someone you know who's white-knuckling their way through life. They're gripping hard on their status, their image. The tighter that they tend to squeeze, the more brittle they seem to become as a person. They become fragile. They become anxiety-ridden as they fight to win life. And they seem to be unable to realize that all of their successes are not going to bring them peace or happiness. Buddhist ethics is the practice of trying to loosen that grip, not by giving up on life and becoming passive, but just loosening the hold this kind of desire has on us. The Buddha was, among other things, a brilliant teacher. His core framework is structured exactly like a physician's assessment. Okay, so here's the illness, this is the way it gets caused, here's the prognosis, and then here's the treatment. He actually used this analogy himself for what he called the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is that dukkha is real. Life, as ordinarily lived, is pervasively unsatisfactory. That's the starting point, right? Realizing this. The Buddha insists you can't skip this part. You have to look honestly at your own experiences, not a curated story that you would put on social media, but the actual texture of your days. The anxiety before, the anxiety underneath and behind all of your achievements. The loneliness inside even your best relationships. The fear gnawing its way through all of your confidence. The goal isn't to wallow in despair here, but to simply acknowledge, to see your suffering clearly. This is why the Buddha's first act after enlightenment was not celebration. He just sat with it. And I think for working class Americans who are often told their dissatisfaction in life is a result of their personal failings rather than a condition of human life itself, this could be genuinely helpful. You're not broken. You don't need more money or more products or more distractions to fix your life. This is just what life is. And once you understand that, and as a necessary first step, then you're already on the path to relief from that anxiety. The second noble truth is that craving is the cause. Dukkha arises from craving. Tanha in Pali. Literally, it means thirst. We suffer because we cling to things. We cling to pleasure and try to extend it well past its natural end or its saturation point. We cling to comfort and we resist the inevitable change. We cling to the image of ourselves as successful, as loved, as competent, as righteous. And we suffer every time reality fails to confirm that image for ourselves. We hide, we lie, we deny, we cover our sins because we don't know how not to crave. Notice that the Buddha here is not saying that desire itself is wrong exactly. I think that's a really common misreading. In fact, it's a misreading that I had of Buddhism for a long time. He is not saying that you shouldn't want anything. That's the mistake I think that the ascetics made. What the Buddha is saying is that a specific kind of compulsive grasping craving, the kind that says, I will never be okay unless I have this thing, unless I keep and hold on to this thing, unless things stay exactly like they are right now. That kind of craving, that kind of desire is the source and the fuel behind all of life's suffering. It's not about having. It's not about not having. Both of those are aspects of this craving, this desire, this tanha. What we need is to find a third way out, to escape this kind of craving. So the third noble truth then is that craving can be released. The cessation of craving is, of course, possible. This is the Buddha's testimony from his own experience, and the testimony of every person who has practiced seriously in the tradition ever since. Nirvana, which simply means something like extinguishing or blowing out, is the state in which the fire of craving just no longer burns inside of you. It's not driving you to satisfy it. This isn't exactly heaven. It's not a place you go to after you dive. It's not a kind of numbness where you just simply stop caring about the world. It's the experience of being fully present, fully alive, but without the constant, desperate grasping. If it's not about having, and it's not about not having, nirvana is about being. It's simply being in your life. I am enough. I simply am. and that is as complete as I need to be. The fourth noble truth then is the Eightfold Path, and that is the path of how. The Buddha does not say, pray harder, believe more, obey these rules. He says, look, there is a practice, a way of living that if you follow with enough honesty and enough effort, then gradually you're going to loosen that grip on craving and you're going to develop a sense of wisdom and compassion. And he's going to lay that out in 8 aspects. And he just says, master these and you're going to master the heart of Buddhist ethics. I'm going to try to go through the Eightfold Path here very quickly. I'm not going to be able to give it its due because simply time constraints, but I want to lay it out so that you can at least get a look at the whole thing. Think of these not as 8 sequential steps, but as 3 interlocking practices that you're going to want to develop simultaneously. And each one is going to deepen and enhance the others. The Buddha called it the middle way. The first practice here is wisdom. This consists of 2 paths. Understanding the 4 noble truths is the first one. Seeing things as they actually are rather than through the distorting lens of ego and craving. This is not something you can skip. It's a perceptual practice. If you can understand it, you can then use that as your compass so that no matter what strange places you might find yourself in life, you'll always have a guide. But if you've misunderstood something, then that's going to make your compass needle off and it's going to easily lead you astray. The second one here is the right intention. That's committing to 3 different orientations. One of renunciation, that is loosening attachment rather than like feeding into it. The second one is goodwill, actively wishing well for others, including people that you even dislike. And the third one being a sense of non-harm, the refusal to cause suffering as a guiding principle for your inner life. This works because if you start off on the wrong foot, you're unlikely to ever achieve your goal here. And so he's using these as principles. We have to know things, we have to learn, we have to be open to new ideas, and we have to already start off with a couple of assumptions. One, we're going to be good people, we're going to try to do good, we're going to try to help everybody. If we can swear into these principles, then we have achieved the first practice, which is wisdom. Once wisdom is in place, then we can move on to the second practice, which is our ethics. The next thing we need to do is practice right speech. There's no lying, there's no slander or gossip designed to divide people or damage reputations. No harshness, no abusive language, no idle chatter that serves no one. Your words are a kind of action, and they cause real effects in the world. I don't think the Buddha would care about things like curse words, as long as they were appropriate. If you drop a hammer on your foot and say, oh shit, that's fine. It's screaming at someone in an attempt to hurt them or to misdirect them or to obscure some truth from them or to abuse them. That's the violation. That's the real sin here. And so the thing you have to do is practice right speech. You also similarly have to practice right actions, which is the second one. You have to abstain from things like killing or stealing or some sort of sexual misconduct. I mean, this should probably go without needing much explanation, but should you do anything to anyone that they don't welcome without any kind of hesitation or reluctance, then you're violating them. The third one is right livelihood. You cannot make your living by causing harm. The traditional list here includes things like weapons dealing, slave trading, butchering, poison making, and intoxicants. But the principle extends. How you earn your living is really a moral question, not merely an economic one. I think this one is especially true today. Some very terrible businesses make a lot of money out there. Influencers who happily lie to the people that they're trying to serve as long as they can continue to influence and it makes them money. I think most working class Americans are forced into jobs that compromise their values simply to survive. The Buddhist tradition doesn't blame individuals for these sort of systematic conditions, but it does insist that the question, how does my work affect the world, is asked. Finally, beyond knowing and doing, you have to have the right mental cultivation. This is the third practice. That includes right effort, actively working to abandon harmful mental states and to cultivate beneficial ones. It's not meant to be passive. It's disciplined inner work on yourself to grow and to learn. It's very much akin to making the right sort of habits that we saw during our discussion of Aristotle. Next, there's right mindfulness, a clear, present moment awareness of your body, your feelings, your mental states, the phenomena around you. Not just meditation techniques, it's learning to see what is actually happening rather than just the habitual story that you always tell yourself about what is happening. This one's a bit tricky because we think we have an understanding of what's going on all the time, when what we really have is our particular picture of the situation. It's the way it looks to us right now because of the way we grew up, or how we grew up, or where we grew up, our experiences. But reflection actually broadens our understanding, and so can learning, and then seeking out diverse perspectives. Finally, there's right concentration, the development of deep, stable, meditative focus. The mind, trained in concentration, becomes an instrument of clarity rather than a generator of noise. Before we end this episode, I really want to deal with two pop culture Buddhist things that I think might influence some people's thinking. One of them is the idea of karma. I think in American pop culture, karma means something like cosmic justice. If you do something bad, then bad things will come about and get you. But that's not quite what the Buddhist understanding is. Karma, or kama, means action, and more specifically, the intentions behind the action. It's best thought of as sort of the natural law of cause and effect, but maybe a primarily psychological one. When you act from a sense of greed, when you act out of hatred or delusion, you sort of reinforce those patterns in yourself. You become more of a grasping, a more hostile and more confused person. And the people around you eventually start to take notice, and they come to see you and treat you as that kind of person. The harm that you do then is not primarily punished from the outside. It simply shapes who you are, and that has natural consequences. Of course, the opposite is also true. If you are constantly taking actions from generosity or compassion and wisdom, you're going to be strengthening those qualities. People will begin to see you as that kind of person. You become more open, you become more capable of joy, more genuinely connected, and that's how you end up living a good life. The other one I want to deal with here is this idea of rebirth. It's a little more complicated. It really is a genuine doctrine in virtually every Buddhist tradition. It's not the same as the Western idea of reincarnation. There's no soul in Buddhism. It's not a soul that travels from body to body, returning after some period of being dead then. It's more like a pattern of karma, a stream of consequences that continues beyond the life of the individual. Your great-grandfather's abuses ultimately influenced your grandparents, and then their abuses end up repeating similar patterns on your parents. And then those parents repeated them onto you. And now you're rebirthing those same patterns onto your kids. You could think of this as intergenerational trauma, reborn generation after generation, long after the original trauma is gone. So that said, many Western practitioners and scholars of Buddhism argue that the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the practice of compassion, those can stand entirely outside of the rebirth doctrine. So if the rebirth doctrine bothers you, but the rest of it seems cool, you're allowed to pick and choose here. So what does the good life look like in Buddhist ethics? Well, I think it looks like a life progressively freed from the compulsive grip of craving. Not a life without desire. It's not a life without passion or without engagement, but a life in which desire is no longer a tyrant that drives your life. It's one in which you can lose things without being destroyed, or receive good things without clinging to them, or encounter suffering, both in yourself and in others, without having to run away, or hide, or defend. Maybe even embracing that sort of suffering as an important part of living a good life. If you recall Aristotle, who said that the good life is eudaimonia, it's flourishing, it's becoming fully what a human being has the potential to be. He said that it requires virtue, practical wisdom, and genuine friendship, and that you can't flourish on your own. The Buddha's not exactly saying the same thing here. He's answering the same question, however, and the answer does have family resemblances to Aristotle. Both of these traditions are going to say that the good life is not about having more, it's about being. Both say that the virtuous character is cultivated through practice. It's not declared by fiat or even achieved through deeds. Both say that the person who has developed genuine wisdom and genuine care for others is living well in a way that no amount of wealth or status or power could ever substitute for. The difference between them, I think, is one of diagnosis. Aristotle's going to build his ethics on the positive actualization of human potential, whereas the Buddha is going to build his on the identification and then removal of the blocks to that kind of potential. The craving, the delusions, the ego clinging that kind of get us stuck. Aristotle, I think, is trying to be more constructive. The Buddha is trying to be more therapeutic. So rather than leave you with a question like I normally do, I'm just going to recommend you take some time to reflect on the Noble Eightfold Path. And that begins with trying to understand the Four Noble Truths. Good luck, and I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for tuning in to American Socrates. If today's episode of Philosophy got you thinking in new ways, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. New, full episodes drop every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review. It helps others find us, and it means a lot. And if you know someone who could use a little more practical wisdom in their life, share this episode with them. Until next time, keep questioning everything.